It's 5 p.m. across India. I am Tanvi Taneja. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll bring you all the day's big stories from across India and the world. With me today from London is my colleague, Ollie Barrett. Good afternoon, Ollie.
Hello Tanvi, it's 12:30 p.m. here in the UK, 1:30 p.m. across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we'll have the latest from the crisis in the Middle East, what the EU's foreign policy chief thinks should happen next, and fresh criticism of Washington from Moscow. First, the headlines.
Israel mounts limited ground raids in Gaza, raid a refugee camp in West Bank, as Prime Minister Netanyahu convenes war cabinet. Germany says continuous terrorism from Gaza making it impossible to ease humanitarian catastrophe, also says only a two-state solution could lead to peace and security.
We can't contain the humanitarian catastrophe if the terrorism from Gaza continues this way. There will be no security and no peace, not for Israel and not for Palestinians, if this terrorism persists.
EU foreign ministers meet in Luxembourg to debate on the situation in Israel and in the region. Discussion on Russia-Ukraine war also on the agenda. And former India cricketing spin legend Bishan Singh Bedi passes away at the age of 77. Israel's military has said its ground forces mounted limited raids into the Gaza Strip overnight to fight Palestinian gunmen. Describing Israel's latest move on the ground, Chief Military Spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari also said that airstrikes were focusing on sites where Hamas was assembling to attack any wider Israeli invasion.
During the night, there were raids by tank and infantry forces. These raids are raids that kill squads of terrorists who are preparing for the next stage in the war. These are raids that go deep, with a contact line. These raids also locate and search for anything we can get in terms of intelligence on the missing and the hostages.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened a meeting with security officials and his war cabinet in Tel Aviv to assess the escalating conflict with Hamas. This comes as the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict entered the 17th day on Monday. Meanwhile, Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel today. Netanyahu said this is a battle against barbarism, and he said that we have to unite against Hamas. Netanyahu also appreciated the solidarity of Greece at the darkest hour of Israel. Meanwhile, Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis said that Greece will continue to support Israel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prime Minister. Dear Bibi, I come here not just as an ally, but as a true friend. What happened was truly horrible, and Greece from the very first moment defended and supported the right of Israel to defend itself in line with international law, and we drew a very clear distinction between Hamas and the Palestinian people, and we will continue to be able to support you and to hope that whatever happens without too much of a humanitarian cost. But you can count on our support, on our help.
Thank you, friend. Thank you.
Meanwhile, DD India correspondent Amritpal Singh ventured into Old Jerusalem and filed this special report on the Arabs and Jews living together in this holy city.
As the war between Israel and Hamas intensifies and Israel is preparing for ground attacks or going into the Gaza Strip, tensions are there all over Gaza and Israel. Right now, I'm in the old city of Jerusalem, one of the world's oldest cities, and also something which is fiercely debated amongst the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews, because it is the holiest city for all three. What you see behind me is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is from where Prophet Muhammad is said to have gone into heaven to meet God. And right next, just right next to it, is the Dome of the Rock, or the Temple Dome, Temple Mount. What you see there is the Wailing Wall, which is one of the holiest places for Jews from all around the world come here and pray. In fact, this old city is divided into different quarters: the Muslim quarter, the Jewish quarter, the Armenian quarter. And when situations like this happen, the tensions here go up.
I live in Jerusalem already for 50 years. I used to be neighbors of Arabs. We got together very much together. But when they started talking on peace, and they did peace, that killed the whole situation. Let us be, we could work together, we could do everything together. Don't interrupt us.
We need to get Hamas out of there so we don't have more stuff, and we can't really do much.
Okay.
It's going to cost them a lot of soldiers if they go in and walking in with like tanks, and that's what they have to do.
There is a big problem now, you know, for both sides, the Palestinian and the Israeli too, you know, and we don't know when it will be going to stop. East Jerusalem, we have here what they call it, Israel, you know, ID, and we're suffering from both sides, you know.
Hamas, you know, they're doing this for their land. They need to take their land back to them. Yes, it's belongs to him. And Israel, you know, every 3, 4 years, they have war here. This is not the same times. Every 2, 3 years, we have the same problem. War, Hamas, Israel. Israel, Hamas. That's what happened here.
So clearly the opinion is divided. The sentiment on the streets of Israel clearly is that of retribution and reprisal. Here in Old Jerusalem, where both Muslims and Jews live, there are Palestinians who live. The idea, their voices, they accuse each other of having started this. And where I am standing, it is one of the most holiest places in the world for the Abrahamic faiths. And this conflict is not new. It may have just flared up now, but it's really a centuries-old conflict. With cameraman SP Dubey, this is Amritpal Singh for DD India in Old Jerusalem.
According to the United Nations, about 1.4 million of Gaza's 2.3 million population are now internally displaced, with many seeking refuge in overcrowded UN emergency shelters. And that's going to be one of the main concerns when EU foreign ministers meet at Luxembourg today. My colleague Ollie Barrett is in London, gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Ollie, calls for this humanitarian pause in this conflict getting louder now.
Well, Tanvi, that is certainly one of the key points for discussion today. As you were saying, EU foreign ministers meeting to discuss the crisis in the Middle East. And the German foreign minister has warned that a continuation of terrorism from Gaza will mean no security and no peace. Germany is reiterating the European Union's backing for a two-state solution for Israelis and Palestinians.
We can't contain the humanitarian catastrophe if the terrorism from Gaza continues this way. There will be no security and no peace, not for Israel and not for Palestinians, if this terrorism persists. We need a path for tomorrow.
And the European Union's Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell is backing calls for a pause in the conflict between Israel and Hamas to let more aid supplies into Gaza.
The most important thing is to call for humanitarian support to go into Gaza. In Cairo, the Secretary General of the United Nations made a dramatic call in order to allow this humanitarian help Israel to enter. The first day, 20 trucks were allowed to come in, 20. Yesterday, were about 20 more. But in normal times, without war, 100 trucks enter into Gaza every day.
Well, he made those comments as EU foreign ministers meet in Luxembourg to discuss the situation in Israel and the region. The foreign ministers are also expected to focus on the Russia-Ukraine conflict and developments concerning Armenia and Azerbaijan.
It is very necessary that there will be humanitarian pauses because it is absolutely necessary that there is more humanitarian aid and that people get help, get medicine, get food, get water.
And we can get more on all of this from DD India's Alex Cadier, who joins me live now from Brussels. And Alex, does the EU back those calls from UN Secretary-General Guterres for a humanitarian pause in the conflict in the Middle East?
Well, Ollie, in a word, yes, it sounds like that will be the course of action taken by the European Union to back the UN Secretary-General in that call for a humanitarian pause. Now, we've seen leaked conclusions that have been leaked to the Financial Times just in the last few moments, saying that EU leaders plan to endorse that call, calling for that humanitarian pause. Now, the language we understand will be the European Council supports the call of UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres for a humanitarian pause in order to allow for safe humanitarian access and aid to reach those in need. And that is a draft conclusion for not the foreign ministers who are meeting today, but their bosses, the heads of state and government who are meeting in Brussels later this week, Thursday and Friday. That will be a very significant position taken by the European Union. You heard Josep Borrell, who is chairing the meeting in Luxembourg of those foreign ministers, saying very clearly what is important is that more and quicker. Those were the two words he used to describe the kind of aid that needs to come in, saying that the few dozen trucks that have been allowed into Gaza are simply not enough. So we have, we understand in the last few moments, news that the European Union will back that call. Now, again, 27 different countries agreeing a common position has always been tricky, particularly on this very divisive conflict. So that position, that draft may change. We know the Czech Republic and Italy, their foreign ministers have already said it's very difficult to imagine a proper ceasefire to take place when you're dealing with a terrorist organization like Hamas. But certainly the EU, eager, or at least in draft form for now, keen to back Antonio Guterres' call for a humanitarian pause. Ollie?
Okay, Alex, and it's not just the Middle East on the agenda, though, is it? What else do we expect to come out of these foreign ministers' discussions in Luxembourg?
Well, Ukraine will be number 2 item on the agenda, as you would imagine. Now, that is the first time since Russia's invasion of Ukraine that it has not been the number 1 topic discussed by foreign ministers when they meet in their regular meetings. So that is quite a significant symbol. Now, EU diplomats are stressing as much as they can that this is not a sign of EU fatigue towards Ukraine, although some have seen this more as a move to show that the EU is consistent across the board. So, for example, backing that humanitarian pause in Gaza is also a way to show that the EU will support international law, will oppose civilians being caught in the crossfire of conflicts both in Ukraine and in Russia. That has been one of the concerns, and I think that'll be particularly relevant for our viewers in India, is the EU wants to send a very clear message to the so-called global south that it is consistent. It will continue to support Ukraine in the face of Russia's invasion, but it will also make sure that people in Gaza are not subjected to breaches of international law, sticking to its principles across the board. Now, the EU hasn't been entirely consistent in the last couple of weeks, but that position is tightening. As you mentioned earlier, they will also be discussing the situation in Armenia and Azerbaijan, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, as we saw. The goal now is to prevent and make sure Azerbaijan does not cross into Armenian territory and pushing further. That will be the key concern. We also expect them to briefly discuss the situation in Serbia and Kosovo. Those tensions have been a thorn on the EU side for months. And finally, the situation in the Sahel region of Africa after those many coups d'etats and the French military forces being pushed out. So a very busy agenda for those foreign ministers, Ollie.
Lots to talk about, Alex. Thank you. That's DD India's Alex Cadier live in Brussels. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has held a fresh series of conversations with Western leaders, insisting the country's victory over Hamas would be a victory for the entire world. Netanyahu briefed the leaders of France, Spain and the Netherlands on the ongoing offensive against Hamas and underscored the determination of the people to eliminate Hamas's military and governing capabilities. And on Twitter, now known as X, US President Joe Biden, who's been speaking with Benjamin Netanyahu and also had a call with the leaders of France, Britain, Italy and Canada, Joe Biden said this. He said that he had had a conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu. He said that it was expressing appreciation for Israel's support in helping to secure the release of 2 American hostages. He went on to say that the Prime Minister and he discussed ongoing efforts to secure the release of all remaining hostages taken by Hamas, and he said that they would continue to stay in touch. DD India correspondent Nick Harper has more from Washington.
Well, President Joe Biden was busy on Sunday. He hit the phones to speak to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but he also spoke to Pope Francis, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and 4 European leaders. The Israel-Hamas conflict was very much the main topic of conversation. Washington is trying to rally allies to give more support to Israel, but also more humanitarian aid to those Palestinians who've been caught up in the conflict. But behind the scenes, Washington is reportedly also trying to stall that potential ground invasion by Israel into the Gaza Strip. It's all to do with fears over hostage safety. On Friday, we saw the release of 2 American hostages by Hamas, but there's still around 200 other hostages still being held of various nationalities. And the fear is, if there is that ground incursion, it'll make it much harder to get those hostages out safely and to get humanitarian aid in to the Palestinians. Also, on Sunday, we saw warnings from the US Secretaries of State and Defense speaking about the possibility of escalation and the conflict spreading throughout the region. There seems to be a real fear from Washington that Iran or some of Iran's allies, like the Iran-backed group Hezbollah in Lebanon, or allies in Syria, may look at this as an opportunity to try and increase and spread the conflict. We've seen an increase in activity at Israel's northern border, skirmishes there with Hezbollah firing rockets into the north of Israel. On top of all of this, Washington has put additional US troops stationed here in the US on preparedness for potential deployment, getting them ready in case they need to move to the region in a non-combat role. And on top of that, more defense systems being sent to the region. The US says it's all about protecting US troops and assets in the region. Nick Harper in Washington, reporting for DD India.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has rejected comments from the US President Joe Biden, saying in an interview that Moscow's interests cannot be suppressed and that US politicians should learn to respect others. Vladimir Putin was responding to remarks by US President Joe Biden in an interview where he said, "Imagine what happens if we, in fact, unite all of Europe and Putin is finally put down where he cannot cause the kind of trouble that he's been causing."
First of all, I think that President Biden is unquestionably one of the most experienced politicians in the world. In general, judging by the time he's in the highest echelons of power. He's been in politics for a long time. He's an experienced man. He knows what goals to set, how to achieve them.
The Russian and Ukrainian armies continue to exchange fire in the conflict in Ukraine. Ukraine says it shot down 14 attack drones in its southern and eastern regions. Air defences brought down 9 Iranian-made Shahed drones over the Odessa region. Russian soldiers also blocked Ukrainian forces trying to cross the Dnieper River in Kherson. In Argentina, the ruling Peronist party on Sunday smashed expectations to lead the country's general elections. Economy Minister Sergio Massa finished on top in the first round, but no candidate received a majority, so Massa and Javier Milei will face off in a second round next month.
In a surprising turn of events, Sergio Massa has emerged as the front-runner in the first round of Argentina's presidential election, underscoring voters' concerns about his chief rival, Javier Milei. Massa secured 36.7% of the vote, while Milei trailed with 30% according to 98.3% of the votes counted. Sergio Massa, following his strong showing, has pledged to lead a national unity government.
I will call for a national unity government on December 10 as president, but a national unity government made up of the best, regardless of their political affiliation, and not based on party agreements.
In contrast, libertarian radical Javier Milei called on voters to end Peronist rule in Argentina after securing the second spot in the runoff against Massa.
We had the most important election in 100 years, an election that posed if we continue with the Kirchnerism model or if we want to return to embrace the ideas of liberalism that made Argentina great in the 19th century. All countries that embrace the ideas of liberalism progress, while those who follow populist ideas unite in misery.
Meanwhile, Patricia Bullrich, the candidate from the Conservative Party and the main centre-right opposition coalition, admitted electoral defeat after finishing third with 23.8% of the vote.
Our cause goes beyond an electoral time. It goes beyond a defeat, as today we acknowledge it.
As the nation gears up for the November runoff, all eyes will be on the two frontrunners Sergio Massa and Javier Milei as they seek to gain the support of a divided electorate and shape the future of Argentina's leadership.
Well, that was a result that surprised many people there in Argentina. That's it from me here in London for today. Tanvi, back to you.
Thank you, Ollie. Ollie Barrett joining us all the way from London. You're watching DD India Global, still to come on this show. Tensions flare over South China Sea again after vessels from China and the Philippines collided in disputed waters on Sunday. And Azerbaijan hosts first joint drills with close ally Turkey near Armenia, the first since Baku's victory in Karabakh.
We are taking up China's gigantic Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, which has completed 10 years in existence and is undergoing a major metamorphosis.
So definitely, I do feel that China has been using the Belt and Road Initiative as a weapon. So it's also a form of economic coercion, if we could call it. There are countries that are looking for cheap infrastructure. Initially, they actually think that this is infrastructure, this is money without no strings attached. But is it really? We have been seeing at least since 2017, 2018 that countries are realizing that this is just not very feasible for us. We are actually moving towards economic collapse.
You're watching DD India. I am Tanvi Taneja. On to the South China Sea now. Philippines has again called on Beijing to stop its provocative actions in the disputed South China Sea after the Sunday collision of its vessels. Beijing and Manila have blamed each other for this incident. Azerbaijan began a series of joint military exercises with close ally Turkey. Azerbaijan's defense ministry said up to 3,000 military personnel were participating in exercises named for the founder of modern Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. It added that the drills were being held across Azerbaijan. This is the first exercise since Baku retook the breakaway region of Nagorno-Karabakh last month. In a first, South Korea on Sunday conducted joint aerial exercises with Japan and the United States. The drill aimed to expand the country's response capabilities against North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. The countries also agreed to carry out annual multi-domain trilateral exercises and set up a hotline for crisis communications. The US and South Korea also completed a joint anti-submarine exercise held from October 6th to October 22nd near the naval base in Guam. And a Pakistani court indicted former Prime Minister Imran Khan and his deputy in an Official Secrets Act case on Monday. A case was filed against Imran Khan for allegedly violating the Official Secrets Act by disclosing a secret diplomatic cable sent by the Pakistani embassy in Washington in March 2022. This cipher was then used by Khan to build a narrative that his government was ousted due to what he said a foreign conspiracy. Khan is currently being held in a prison near Islamabad. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant, along with Delhi's Lieutenant Governor and Indian Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, along with other G20 delegates, took part in a plantation drive held in India's capital, New Delhi. The drive aims to promote India's agenda of lifestyle for environment and combating climate change. India's External Affairs Minister emphasized India's stand on climate change on the occasion.
The Green Development Pact, the message of women-led development, the support for digital public infrastructure, the life mission, the lifestyle, sustainable lifestyle for environment. At the end of it all, there was a very strong sustainability, green, global South image that came out of the G20. This G20, we would like it certainly to be remembered as a green G20, as a sustainable G20, in many ways as a G20 of the future.
And now let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. Director General of Nuclear Watchdog Agency, International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, has arrived in India. This is the IAEA chief's first visit to India. India's Ministry of External Affairs in a social media post said that Grossi's visit will further strengthen India-IAEA ties across diverse sectors. The prolonged and extreme dry weather from El Niño has hit the resort island of Bali. The local government has declared 14 days of emergency as the drought worsens and some local residents had to queue up for clean drinking water. Earlier this year, Indonesia's weather agency had warned of a severe dry season to peak between August to early November, threatening harvests and heightening the risk of forest fires. Former Indian cricketer Bishan Singh Bedi passed away at the age of 77 today. The legendary Indian spinner picked up 266 wickets in Test cricket at an average of 28.71 with 14 5-wicket hauls. He also bagged 7 wickets in ODIs. Bedi was by far India's most successful left-arm spinner until he was surpassed by Ravindra Jadeja earlier this year during the ICC World Test Championship final against Australia. And with that, it's a wrap in this edition of DD India Global. Do join us for another edition of this show at 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. Connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram at DD India Lives. DD India Live, in fact. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from all of us here in New Delhi. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.